we have really been trying to get students to think, not just mimic, not just copy with the I do, we do, you do, but actually think. And I am very, very used to doing the I do, we do, you do. And so it has been, like I said, over the last 4 or 5 years, I'm really trying more rich tasks, more even of the 3-act math tasks, you guys, your tasks. And I just want to do more. It just seems
Today
like I
we
want to
speak
do
with
more,
23-year
like
veteran teacher from Alabama, Tiffany Roddy. Tiffany joins us on this Math Mentoring Moment episode where we explore a struggle or challenge she's working on, and together we brainstorm next steps to ignite her teacher moves.
Stick around and you'll learn how you can move away from the I do, we do, you do math class. How you can gain more time in your course instead of feeling like you're always out of time. And finally, you'll learn about the 2 moments that are most important in your lesson.
All right, let's do this. Welcome to the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. I'm Kyle Pierce from tapintoteenminds.com.
And I'm John Orr from mrorr-isageek.com. We are 2 math teachers who, together,
with you, the community of math moment makers worldwide who want to build and deliver math lessons that spark engagement,
fuel learning,
and ignite teacher action. Welcome, math moment makers from everywhere around the globe. You are listening to episode number 69, How Can I Get More from My Students? A math mentoring moment.
Let's get ready for another jam-packed and resource-rich episode. But first, we'd like to say thank you to all of you math moment makers out there and around the globe who have taken the time to share feedback by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts.
This week, we want to highlight CJ, who gave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That said, this podcast renews my love of teaching. Oh, I love the sound of that, John. Here's what CJ says. This podcast is like a one-on-one hour with your instructional coach at your time and pace. I often listen to episodes twice to get all of the good information. Thank you for all of your work. Oh, that is so awesome to hear from CJ. And I'll be honest, CJ, when the episodes go live, I re-listen to the episodes too, because it feels like such a long time since we record them with our guests. And I'm telling you, every time I re-listen, I learn something new from our guests as well. So happy that you're taking the same approach.
We can't thank CJ enough for taking the time out of their day to not only listen, but to help us increase our number of ratings to over 150 around the globe and 60 reviews.
If you haven't taken a moment to go and give us an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you're currently listening on, we would certainly appreciate it. It helps so much in terms of getting the word out and ensuring that we can reach as many math moment makers just like you around the globe.
All right, now before we get to our discussion with Tiffany, we want to give you a sneak peek into this episode as Tiffany shares that she's rocking vertical non-permanent surfaces in her classroom to get her students up and actively fueling sense making. While regular old chalk and whiteboards do the trick, oftentimes there aren't enough vertical non-permanent surfaces in your classroom to accommodate all of your students.
Well, that's where our friends at Whitebook come in. Toby and Frank from Whitebook have these super cool and very portable Flipbook chart packs that are great for filling the vertical non-permanent surface void in your classroom or presentation space.
Cal and I even use them at conferences and workshops to get our teacher participants up and actively fueling their sense making. And now you can too. We've partnered with Whitebook for you to grab 40% off a flip chart pack by visiting makemathmoments.com/40 moments.
That's makemathmoments.com/40 moments. Oh, and if you're going to be at NCTM 2020, which is next week in Chicago, John, I can't even believe that it's already here. Woo! If you're going to be there, well, Whitebook is going to be there too, and so are John and I. So Whitebook's going to be giving away some free swag at their booth, and we always pop by the Whitebook booth to say hello to both Toby, Frank, and to you math moment makers if you're around. So make sure you come and say hi and visit us in our session. I think it's on Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. All right, let's jump into our conversation with Tiffany. Hey there, Tiffany. Thanks for joining us here on the Making Math Moments That Matter podcast. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great this evening, guys. It's so good to hear from you.
Tiffany, fill us in and our listeners. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you're coming from, how long you've been teaching, what's your current role, what part of the country you're coming from?
Well, I am in a little town called Brent, Alabama. So I'm in the southern region of the United States. And I've been teaching for about 23 years.
I couldn't tell.
I bet. That's funny. My husband asked me if I was going to say y'all while we were talking. I've been teaching about 23 years. My current role is I am a classroom teacher. I teach 8th grade math. I started out in 3rd grade. Now I'm up in 8th grade.
Fantastic. Fantastic to hear. We love hanging out in those middle grades. I feel like the concepts just get so rich and the math can be really exciting. It can also be really boring if we kind of do things the way I did them for so many years. But before we dive in here, when we say math class to you, what is a math moment that comes to mind for you? What pops into your mind, if you don't mind sharing with the math moment maker community?
Well, I tell my students all the time, back in the olden days, we used to do math like this, and it was straight rows and learning all the algorithms and following the procedures. But that's not how I view math class anymore. Personally, it seems to me like the kids still want to have math class that way, but I like the rich tasks, the things that help the students see, hey, this is something I am going to use every day in my real life.
How does that vary, or how does that compare, contrast to maybe your experience as a math student? So you had this vision of like math being always in rows and probably happening a certain way. Like, do you feel like that was typically your experience when you think of math class, or were there any of those maybe teachers that kind of pop out that maybe tried things a little bit differently and sort of shook things up for you?
Most of what I remember for math was rows, maybe a little bit in middle school. I think we might have had tables, but we were at the ends of tables. So it wasn't like we were there collaborating together. I can remember receiving the instruction.
Because you had to, right?
Right. And then we had the practice problems. I don't guess I really saw any of the what we would call modern day math class now until I got into my college classes and I started dealing more with the cooperative groupings and different things like that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I had the same experience where my math classes were just like you described. And it wasn't until we got to teachers college or college where it was like, now we're going to shake things up. We're going to actually try to implement these great teaching strategies and try new things. And it wasn't even until years later where I felt comfortable enough to implement those in my own classroom. So totally reciprocate that feeling about math class that you've just shared. We'd like to kind of dive in a little deeper into what you're doing in your classroom and what struggles you've had. But before we talk about a struggle that you've had or currently having that we want to explore here today, but before that, do you mind sharing a success that you've had in your role recently?
Yes. Last year and this year, I got really into the vertical non-permanent surfaces. With Whitebook, as a matter of fact, I used some of my classroom supply money and I purchased a pack of the Whitebook boards or the flip charts. And I put those up all in my room. And it seems like whenever we work on those, there's a lot of collaboration that goes on. Still have some things I'd like to work out there, but I feel successful when we work on those. And recently, even more recently, back in January, I believe it was, when I started my exponent unit, I introduced it with one of your penny activities. where if you have the penny and it doubles each day, would you rather have $1 million or would you rather have that amount after the 30 days? And we did those on the vertical non-permanent surfaces, and it went really well. We enjoyed that.
That is a awesome, fun task. And actually, as I've shared on my website, when I put that penny a day task up there and created the visuals for it, I remember it was actually a colleague, Dave Bracken, at my first school that I taught at, who proposed that challenge. And I think it was just in the staff room one day where all the teachers were just kind of thinking about it. And again, it was one of these things where it's just inherently curious, right? Where you're sort of like, there's got to be a trick here, like something's going on. And it really gets you thinking. And I really love that task with my students. It's a great one to do early in the year, or when you're looking at this comparison and looking at exponential versus any other type of function, whether it be linear or even just this flat 10,000, I think, or 1 million, or whatever that quantity is that you want to throw for students. And I really love too that you've mentioned vertical non-permanent. And actually, I was just in a classroom yesterday with a fellow high school teacher. I'll say this particular teacher, I'm going to say his name's Dylan. I won't say his last name just for privacy, but I'd call him a good friend and a great colleague. And he is a really sharp and routined teacher. Like, he does things really well, but he's looking to kind of expand his teaching a little bit. And vertical non-permanent to me was the suggestion that I gave him as kind of that first step, because it felt really easy to like implement and kind of play with. And then also, I feel like the results are really awesome right off the bat. Like, what would you say to Dylan if he's listening right now, Tiffany, in regards to your shift in trying to bring vertical non-permanent into the classroom?
I don't know if Dylan uses flippity.net or not, but that is one of the ways that I get my students going to the stations. And so that we're not always working with the same people, you can mix it up. They're going to different stations. But really, I think you just have to jump in there and do it. And that way you can see, okay, do I need to jump in there and do those stations? Flippity.net is the one I use, like I said, to get different random groupings and then just get them up and go into the board. It just seems to me like having them up and talking about the math is so beneficial. I can see so much more of what they're doing than when they're sitting in their seats.
Yeah, for sure. Flippity. And I think I just saw this on, I think maybe it was even you that posted this on our Facebook group. Somebody was asking about random grouping and how do they group people at the boards. And that website came up, and I haven't used that one yet, but I definitely want to try it because I think it can be great. I use the random grouping cards that I kind of created, modeled off cards that I've seen around where they just have different shapes, different numbers, different colors on them.
Yes, I love those too.
Yeah, and the kids come in, they choose a card, and they go and sit with a partner. My cards are designed more for partners or groups of 3, but if you wanted more groups, I think that Flippity is a great resource. Thanks for sharing that one. Now, Tiffany, we'd love to keep diving into this with you. And I know that you wanted to share something you've been currently struggling with or working on or thinking about. Would you mind sharing that with us? What's challenging you lately in your teaching?
Well, like I said, I've been teaching for 23 years, and it just seems like over the last 4 or 5 years that I want more from my students than just them following procedures, algorithms. I want them to do the sense making that you guys talk about. And, I am what I call a rescuer at heart, because I used to think that students, when they struggle, that meant I wasn't providing the right kind of examples or I wasn't doing something. But the last several years, I just want them to start thinking outside the box and try new methods and be okay when something doesn't work and try something else and not just give up and not just quit.
Right. That makes so much sense. And I think this is one of those pieces, and we talk about it on the show so often, that most of us got into teaching because we are really passionate about helping kids. And that is such a great mission. It's a great goal. But at the same time, it's also the thing that I think makes it so difficult, because we end up hurting students and helping them too much. I'm wondering currently right now, if you were to think about your classroom, what makes you feel like you're maybe not where you want to be? I don't want to say that you're not hitting the mark or whatever. Like, we all want to get a little bit better, but try to paint us a little bit of a picture as to where you are now and maybe where you were and where you've sort of shifted to since, so that we can kind of get a sense as to whereabouts you are today, so that we can maybe try, the three of us, figuring out kind of our next step to nudge forward.
Okay. Well, in our system, we've been really trying to come up with some different strategies to use. And I'm going to go back maybe 10 years now. And some of the best practices is what it's called. And it's called scaffolding teaching. And it's the I do, we do, you do. But I'm also part of an initiative called AMSTI, which is the Alabama Math, Science, Technology Initiative here in Alabama. We have really been trying to get students to think, not just mimic, not just copy with the I do, we do, you do, but actually think. And I am very, very used to doing the I do, we do, you do. And so it has been, like I said, over the last 4 or 5 years, I'm really trying more rich tasks, more even of the 3-act math tasks, you guys, your tasks. And I just want to do more. It just seems like I want to do more, but sometimes it's like they're fighting me. Like, just tell us what to do so we can do it.
Yeah. It's like they're so used to the process in math class, especially by the time they reach you in grade 8, that the way math class is supposed to go, or at least the way we've sort of told them or trained them math class is supposed to go, is I'm going to sit here and I'm going to essentially mimic you. I love the words that you're using. Clearly, you have been on board with the Make Math Moments 3-part framework, because you are talking about this idea of fueling sense making. And I'm hearing the words, this I do, we do, you do, that guided or that gradual release of responsibility. And we talk a lot about that in our framework guidebook, which is on our website, makemathmoments.com/framework. And it sounds like you've had a look in there, because a lot of those things come up in there around this idea of how students mimic. And we cite some of Peter Lildahl's work and research and all the vertical non-permanent pieces. So this is really something that I think a lot of people are struggling with. And even John was mentioning to me here in the chat, just saying this idea that oftentimes we're harder on ourselves than maybe we should. Like, you're probably doing a much better job at this than maybe you're giving yourself credit for. However, we do definitely appreciate how reflective you're being and that you do want to continue pushing forward. I think we always want to do that. So I'm wondering, like, if you were to kind of picture right now your classroom, and you're picturing all the seats and you're picturing the students sitting in the seats, and you were to kind of just take a look around, like, what would you say the percentage of students that are actually sort of demanding this more traditional lecture style is? Like, do you feel like it's a couple students and then maybe they're rallying the troops, like everybody else is saying, like, yeah, I'm going to just follow the lead here? Or do you find that maybe some are just being a little bit more loud or more vocal than maybe some of the others? And maybe some of the others aren't actually sharing that opinion, but we're making those assumptions based on those louder voices. I'm just curious if you kind of visualize that, and you might need a moment to think about it, but what would be your perspective if you kind of reflect on that thought?
Well, that is so funny that you asked that, because I teach 5 math classes a day, 4 pre-algebra classes, and 1 algebra class. And I would even have to go between the different class periods. I've got a couple of class periods that are all in. Whatever you want to do, Miss Roddy, we'll try it. However you want me to do this. You want me to get up at the boards? We'll do it. And then I've got a couple of class periods that I won't say they're vocal, but a lot of times they'll just sit. And I'll be like, okay, guys, you know this, you know how to do this. And they still just sit. And so I'm really working on trying to elicit responses from more than just the same 5 people in those 2 classes, because I do have some good mathematical thinkers there. I just want everybody on board.
Yeah. You know what? We have to, I think, congratulate you on that success by saying that you've got full classes that are like, I will do whatever you want me to do. And they're buying into that. That is awesome to hear. I'm sure you are creating moments for those kids they're going to take with them from the next class to the next class. So that's awesome. And I think we all struggle, Tiffany, with some students who will refuse to buy in or want to be shown what to do and don't want to think, because it is easier, right? It's easier not to think and just be shown what to do and get on with your homework. And I think a lot about this lately. And I think Kyle was kind of hinting at this question of like, how many kids are actually saying that? Because there's this bias that we have. It's called the availability bias. And the availability bias basically says that we overemphasize recent examples for many different things. It's not just math or teaching. It's lots of things that you're thinking that something is fresh, an example is fresh in your mind. You overemphasize that's what's actually the thing. This is what is driving this thing, or these are the results because they're just fresh in our mind. And, you know, after a lesson, I tend to always think what you think. I'm like, the whole class wasn't into that lesson. And really, when I step back and go, okay, am I thinking about the whole class, or is the availability bias kind of creeping in on me? And when you think about it, I'm really focusing on like 3 vocal kids who are just loud in a sense that they're going to make their opinion known to me. And then it makes me go the whole class, because I really just, I'm thinking about those kids that were, you know, I had to work harder to get them to buy in or engage and do some thinking. But generally, if like what Kyle said is like, how much percent are we thinking here? It's only maybe 2-3 kids that I really think about after class that I'm like, I just wish I could get those kids. But then I'd group them as a whole. And I think you've got a lot of success here. And, you know, I think we just tend to be hard on ourselves because of that bias. And I think there's lots that's probably going on in your classroom that you're really doing really great at. And sometimes it's fresh in my mind about that lately. And I just got to take a step back and go, what are the things that we did do well? Who are the kids that did show that? Like, let's focus on those, because we definitely, I know all teachers do this. We focus on the kids that give us the most challenge. And this is good for, this is why we get into teaching, right? Is we want to be challenged in the sense that we want all of our students to learn. And so I think we can frame in a little bit more to go on how can you get some of those students to engage? And how can you get some of those students to think? Kyle and I have done lots of thinking on that and lots of resource sharing on how to get students to problem solve, how to get students to think more. So I think we can dive in on that. But before we do that, what have you tried so far to say, I know that you've said you've got 3-act maths trying and you've got the kids at the boards, but what else would you say you've tried so far to get your kids to not just mimic math, but think more on their feet or think about what they're doing instead of just kind of sitting there? And then Kyle and I can share some of our thoughts.
I like doing games. I think we have done so much standardized testing over the years that a lot of students just don't think math is fun anymore. And I don't ever remember not thinking math was fun while I was in school. I just always thought math made sense. It's patterns, you know, you're looking for things that made sense. So I'd like to have some things that make sense, and games a lot of times that these students don't always play now, like we used to play games on, you know, the weekends or board games and things like that. So I've tried to incorporate some of that to help with fluency. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you want me to share this or not, but just this week, I used the stacking paper videos and the 3X math task is what I call it, to introduce proportionality. And we were talking about proportionality and we're going into equations, linear equations and things like that. But I guess one of the things, and this may not be answering your question, but one of the things I was seeing with the students is they were taking all the information and maybe they would just add all the numbers. So that's where that sense making, I do a lot of number talks, or I try to do a lot of number talks. I even like the clothesline math. I haven't got to do a lot of that this particular year, but working with the double number lines and things like that. So those are some of the other things that I try to incorporate in.
Yeah. And it sounds like just listening to some of these ideas that are coming out is that you are doing some innovative things. And I think you are right about games. And some of the things that were, I guess, more kind of built into how we grew up, right? Like we played a lot more games at home and we did a lot of other things. Like our experiences are really changing. An example would be I hear teachers a lot saying like kids can't count change anymore. And, when you really think about it, it's like, well, how often are they actually counting change anymore? Like there's kids in grade 8 that are using debit cards or gift cards or all of this digital currency, which those are lost opportunities for kids. So I think those are things that all of us are kind of facing and having to kind of confront and think about how are we going to address these differences in how students' experiences in math and working with numbers is changing. I'm wondering, you mentioned math talks or number talks, which I think is great. When we talked about trying to get some of those students on board, and again, to John's point about thinking about that availability bias, I also think about there's a few different ratios out there. Some are 3-to-1, some are 5-to-1. I've even read of up to 7-to-1 for like every negative comment or negative thought, you have to have 3 positive thoughts to kind of neutralize it, or some research says 5. And the same can be true here, where when one thing goes bad in our day, it tends to really throw it off. But yet there's all these other positive things happening, and we're either just completely ignoring them or we just assume that that's supposed to be normal, when in reality they're wins. But I'm wondering if we think to your classroom and we go, okay, the bell just rang. We walk into class. You were saying that number talks is something that you like to do. And I think that's fantastic. I'm wondering about how long you feel like, when do students, or when do you prompt students to start interacting with one another, and specifically trying to address this challenge you had with a couple of groups you were saying where, it just sort of feels like it's the same kids participating. I'm curious what that might look like or sound like, if there's certain intentional moves to get them interacting early, or do you find it's like in the middle of your block or near the end of the block when you start to ask them to sort of get more interactive with one another? I'm wondering if you can paint us a picture of what that might look like or sound like.
So, like when the students come in, we have a procedure where we are required to do a bell ringer, which is like bell work when you come in, so you can take attendance and do the teacher things you have to do at the first few minutes of class. That's also our time when we're supposed to work with small groups or individuals for intervention. So about the first 10 minutes of class, I have the students work on various things, but it's kind of spiral review stuff so that I kind of try to keep it fresh. But that bell work normally is more procedural. And so there's not a lot of interaction going on during that time. Although if I am working with a student or a group, then sometimes I'll say, okay, you can ask so-and-so at your table or things like that, just so it doesn't get chaotic while I'm trying to work with a smaller group or an individual. And then I have a timer that goes off and they automatically put those things away. I introduce the lesson or ask the question or whatever. And almost always right after that, there's always some kind of, okay, take a couple of minutes to independent think. And then after that, it's a turn and share with your partner or share with your table group. And then we come and share it with the whole group if things are needed. I love the which one doesn't belong. Those really do spark some good discussions. There's some other opening activities I like, and they just flew right out of my head just then. Which one doesn't belong is one of my favorites, though, because everybody can come up with something for that.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's really a low floor for sure. WODB.ca, that website put together by Kyle and I's good friend, Mary Barassa out of Ottawa. But I think you're trying lots of good things here, and something to think about, I think, for your bell ringer. It sounds like what's happening in my class. We have to have a bell ringer. We got attendance to do. We got a couple things procedurally we got to do. We want our kids thinking right away. And I also try to emphasize the low floor immediately. So it sounds like your bell ringer is kind of individualized, and it might set the tone to be more quiet, be more, hey, wait and get, is my first kind of inkling about a bell ringer where it's not actively asking our students to engage and discuss. And that's what I've been doing with my bell ringer. And I was reading a book called When by Daniel Pink, and it's all about the science behind timing. And he goes on to say that there are two really important times. and this is not really a no-brainer here, but he says that the beginnings of things are really, really important and the ends of things. So it's like beginnings of class and ends of class is how I translate that into my math teaching world. Because When is the book, When by Daniel Pink, is not a math book. It's not a teaching book. It's just about timings of various things and the science behind timing. And so when I translated that into my class, I said, like, I really need to make sure that I nail beginnings of classes, and I really got to make sure that I nail ends of classes, because I want my students to be coming in thinking and then feel like they're welcomed, and then also end the same way, like go out thinking, but also go out feeling like class was a success today. So these are the things I've been thinking about lately. And I think right now, bell ringers are a great way to lower that floor immediately and get that discussion happening right off the bat. And so one way you could, I think, take advantage of that, and you even mentioned the tool and the technique, the think, pair, share, is, you need a few minutes to do the attendance, but that could be the thinking part. And then it's immediately turn and talk to your neighbor about what you're saying. So which one doesn't belong? Awesome for that. Estimation 180, writing down 3 estimates, not just one estimate. Awesome for that. Lots of discussion can happen there. Would you rather math from John Stevens? This is a great one to get that talking. And you can do these in any class. It doesn't have to be just a class that you might be working with that particular topic on that prompt. But I do them for any class. It doesn't even matter what the prompt happens to be, just to get kids talking. And Kyle and I actually, Kyle, we employ that same strategy of thinking about the beginnings of things when we go to do workshops and presentations with teachers. It's how can we get the audience talking right away, because it changes the dynamic in the room so that it's more welcoming, but also more conducive to allowing voice to be heard in the room, which makes everyone kind of relax a little bit and then allows the ears to go, okay, I'm going to listen to what these guys are going to say. This is the same thing we want in our classrooms. It's how can we get our kids to talk right away so that they feel like their voice is going to be heard, and their voice is heard. They're going to start to think more and start to have that problem solving will come easier. It won't come all right away, but a lot easier. Just that beginning of class, I think, is a huge thing you could probably do to change things just in a small way, but I think could have huge effects.
Yes. It's kind of funny that you say that, because back before Christmas, I had run out of printer ink, which is how I print off my bell ringers. And so what I would do is when the students would come in the classroom, I would already have the flippity groups up, and they would have to immediately sit their things down and go to the stations, the whiteboard stations. And then I would put up either, and I don't know if I'm going to say her name right, Fawn Nguyen.
Fawn
Nguyen.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
Yep.
I would put up some of her visual presentations and have them try to come up with the next couple of sequences in the pattern, and then the 43rd sequence, or the 43rd term would be what I would call it now. And either that, one day I would do that. The next day they would go get in that same group. So they had that same station for the week. But then I would put up, have you seen the emoji number puzzles?
Yes, I have. I think that might be Mashup Math.
Yes.
Anthony
Yes.
at Mashup Math, maybe?
Mashup
Amazing.
Does
Math.
that ring a bell?
Yes, that's it. Where it would give you like 3 of the same ones, and it would give you a value, and then you would use that value for the second equation. And so they didn't know they were doing equations, but they were getting them left and right, and they loved it. It was hard for me to get my procedural stuff done, but I did notice more early engagement when I did things like that.
Right, right. And I was thinking as well, as John was mentioning that, and, thinking of creative ways that you can try to, I know that there's certain things that are tough because you do have to get them done. You have to do certain things at certain times. But like John said, we always are trying in our minds, and we reflect on this all the time. If we do a presentation, oftentimes we'll do a presentation or we'll plan a presentation, and in our minds, we're like, it's a pretty slick slide deck. The messaging's really what we believe to be clear. And then like sometimes at the end of a presentation, especially the first time we do it, we look back and we go, there was something missing today. Like it just didn't feel like people were in it like they usually are. And when we come down to it, oftentimes it's like, we waited too long to get people talking. And for me, and talking about that teacher earlier that I had referenced, that was another thought that we had, was like vertical non-permanence, one thing, which is great. So the quicker we can get kids up and moving is really good, and having kind of like transitions, but then also thinking of how we can get them talking and getting them talking often. And sometimes it's something as simple as reframing how I was going to ask a question. So changing that questioning technique to kind of put it in the hands of students instead of it being, and like you had mentioned, you sort of admitted, just like John and I, where we were really, really eager to help kids and we were saving kids too early. Sometimes if we just kind of bite our tongue and we think, how can I, instead of telling right now, phrase this idea as a question for kids to discuss, give them a tight timeline. So saying like, you have exactly 60 seconds for each of you to share one idea about blank. And then we're going to try to argue it out as a class, like what makes most sense. Like in the class I was watching yesterday, something as simple as wanted to recall the idea of where the independent and the dependent variable go on the X and the Y axes. And rather than asking a question like, where do you think it goes and why do you think it goes there? Or does it even matter? Just gives kids that opportunity to take that 1 minute to talk it out with someone. And then when I go to ask the class to share, now that they've shared it with someone else, they've sort of gotten that confirmation from someone else in the room to go, you know what, that idea, Tiffany, that was a pretty good idea. You know, you kind of get that head nod, you get that hat tip, and students kind of go, you know what, I am going to share that out. Whereas when I don't have that chance, that your mind, unfortunately, always playing tricks, it's never giving you good advice, right? Your irrational mind is saying, oh, what you're thinking is probably not very useful or probably doesn't make any sense. So I'm wondering, thinking about that turn and talk time, how that might maybe more intentionally come into how I pose those questions. Because one of the things that I really struggled with for a long time was I was using a variety of really cool tasks and resources, but I now realize that the task itself might be cool or shiny or fancy, but it's really what we do with it. And by what we do with it, it's those little tiny pieces of just me reframing how I present something and kind of put that power, like empower students, put it in their hands to kind of give them a little bit more of that opportunity to chat and share.
I don't have any problem with the collaboration issue. I love to hear the students talk about math. I mean, I would talk about math all day to somebody if they would listen, which is kind of what my students have to do, but nobody else wants to do
Right.
that.
I love it.
But the time factor, it has me like just all knotted up right now. Those state tests are coming and we got to get to this and we got to get to that. If I don't feel like they're ready to get to that, do I just go ahead and push them there anyway? Will that help bring up some of those rich tasks in and help bring that learning that I need them to get to? Am I not just giving them enough credit for thinking maybe? I'm just kind of stumped right in that area.
Yeah, about that, Kyle and I say a lot here because it's not a cop-out or anything, but we say it depends. You know, it depends on the readiness factor, but it also, time is a reality. And we do have to cover curriculum and standards. So there is definitely, in my class, we have to definitely kind of move along, but also I want to put my students in positions to explore concepts, but then practice those concepts. And then we do have to move on to new concepts and explore. So consider the time aspect for sure. I think for me, that time aspect has alleviated itself a little bit when I've done course planning. You've taught the course so many times, you know, kind of like what topics are going to flow together, what topics you can blend together. And I think that's helped me kind of save time by saying, you know what, I can do some patterning right now that introduces quadratic relations, but at the same time, that patterning might lend itself to multiplying binomials because a kid might write an expression for a quadratic pattern that is one way, but then an equivalent expression written differently because they saw the pattern differently. It can be written another way. And all of a sudden we have introduced quadratics and second differences and also talked about how to simplify expressions all in the same lesson. And we can build on those as we go, but hitting a few topics can be helpful in those open kind of task discussions. You kind of like open the door to things and then can dive deeper. And the other thing that allows me to do is learn about your kids. Like we've said here on the podcast before, when you do tasks like those openly for the first time and they can see them at the boards and you can see what they're doing and you're giving them a chance to showcase their understanding first. It's like a diagnostic assessment. You might realize you don't need to spend 2 days from your course plan on topic X because most of the class is showing good thinking on that topic. And you can go, okay, well, we can spend more time over here or less time here, and we can move on here, and you get to play with that. But I think I've got that time back because I see so much more of what my kids know and what they can do. And that gives you the time because you now can make your plan flexible. The way I used to teach, it was like 2 weeks straight. That's for that chapter, no matter what. The test day was set just because I had that mindset that we had to get through the course. How do I get through the course? Well, there's 8 chapters. Divide the whole year up by 8, and there you go. That's the timing per chapter. So it's been a lot more flexible for me in these last few years because of the way we engage our kids in the tasks by just listening to what they can do.
Tiffany, just kind of listening to that, the time challenge for me, I know that's always going to be that huge weight on teachers' shoulders that we feel because of time and because of high stakes tests and all of those things. And I know no matter what we say here, it doesn't sort of like remove that weight. But at the same time, I always think to myself, whenever I'm kind of thinking, I don't have enough time here, I need to move faster. I just think back to all the years where I covered curriculum, but students didn't really learn curriculum. And now I realize I'm like, if I can do more, if I can dive deeper and give kids the ability to problem solve, which sounds like I want to tip my cap to you because it sounds like what you're doing right now is you're making a big shift. You're in that process, the process that will probably never end, right? We're going to continue trying to shift and trying to refine until the day we retire and we hang it up. But at the end of the day, you want your kids to be more resilient problem solvers. And that's what I'm hearing. And I think by giving them those opportunities to reason in math class, even if I didn't cover every single ounce and every single drop of that curriculum that I am supposed to cover, I think I'm doing a better service to my students. I think I'm setting them up for more success by teaching them how to problem solve so that when they see something on that's high stakes assessment, they have that ability to think. They have that perseverance, that resilience that we want to build for them. So before we ask you one last question here and hang it up for the evening, I do want to say, it sounds like you've got so many great things going on in your classroom right now. And I'm hoping that you think about, I'm going to call them little tweaks because I think it's like little things that we can do that can have a huge impact. And sometimes in our minds, we're thinking we have to do like something super radical from what we're doing. What I did today, tomorrow I got to do something completely different or approach it completely different. But to me, it sounds like you are on that right path. Like that path is right there. And it's, little tweaks along the way that might be able to make a big difference. Like when John and I switch that presentation and say, you know what, we've got to get people talking within the first 3 minutes of our presentation. What are we going to do that? It doesn't take us long to think of that move, but we could have completely scrapped the whole presentation and started over. But it was just that little tweak that can make all the difference. So I want you to think for a moment here. And we're wondering, are there anything from this conversation that you found useful? Any takeaways that you might be able to kind of bring with you after this call, kind of reflect on it and help you as you kind of plan forward looking towards the remainder of this school year?
Yes, I am definitely going to try to tweak the beginning because I do, for the most part, during that bell ringer, I do require them to be silent so that I can work with the other groups. So I'm going to have to figure out something so that I can get my intervention in at some point during the class time and still go ahead and get them talking right there at the beginning so that they do understand. That's what I'm looking for. That now they're going to talk, and don't let me say that they won't, but wanting them to talk about math.
Awesome. That's great to hear because I think those are things I've been focusing on a lot lately is the beginnings, but also the ends for me is something that I've been working on this year and trying to think about because it's like you get to the end of the class and you're like, okay, there's only 5 minutes left. Everyone stands around or everyone kind of like whips out their phones. And I sometimes feel it's like a letdown. All of a sudden everyone leaves. It's kind of like we could be doing something with that time to kind of bring the level back up.
we are required to do some exit slips. Not every day. Every day you can't get to an exit slip, but that formative assessment, some type of formative assessment there so that, we can see where they are. And I kind of feel bad on some days if things don't move as fast as I think they should. Getting to that formative assessment is kind of a struggle.
Those are some great takeaways for you, and we're actually really looking forward to it. If you would, we'd love to have you come back on in, say, 6 months or next year after you've tried these this year, these ideas, and then maybe started the next year with some of these ideas. We would love for you to come back and share your learnings with us. But thanks so much. We know that you've grown a lot. You were a fall online workshop participant. You became a certified math moment maker. I think from talking here, Tiffany, sounds like you've come a long way and you've learned a good deal. And I think your students will thank you for sure.
Well, I'm still trying to be that certified math moment maker. I haven't gotten to make it in there yet.
Well, you know what? You are doing great. And it was awesome following you along that journey this past fall and continuing to learn alongside you on Twitter and online in the online communities. We are so thankful for you sharing this conversation with the math moment makers around the world. And like we say in the online workshop, it's just the beginning, right? It's just the beginning of a very long journey, and we're going to always have to continue refining our practice. But like John said, you are doing such a fantastic job. We want to give you that hat tip to you, and we hope you have a fantastic evening. We can't wait to bring you back on and see how those little tweaks are going along the way, especially to that beginning of your class routine.
Well, thanks, guys. This has really been an honor, and I appreciate all your help, and I've enjoyed finding you on Apple Podcasts and following you on Twitter and Facebook and all that good stuff.
Thanks so
awesome.
much.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. We hope you have a great night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
As always, both John and I learned so much from these Math Mentoring Moment episodes. They are our favorite to record. But in order to ensure we hang on to this new learning so it doesn't wash away like footprints in the sand, we must reflect on what we've learned. An excellent way to ensure this learning sticks is to reflect and create a plan for yourself to take action on something that you've learned in this particular episode.
A great way to hold yourself accountable is to write it down, or even better, share it with someone, your partner or colleague or the mailman or the Math Moment Maker community by commenting on the show notes page, tagging at Make Math Moments on social media, or in our free private Facebook group, Math Moment Makers K through 12.
Awesome stuff. And as you heard from Tiffany on this episode, she is rocking the vertical non-permanent surfaces. So we want to remind you again that our friends at Whitebook, Toby and Frank, have super cool and very portable Flipbook chart packs, and they're great for filling the vertical non-permanent surface void in your classroom or wherever you are presenting.
Kyle and I even use them at conferences and workshops to get our teacher participants up and actively fueling their sense making. And now you can too. We've partnered with Whitebook for you to grab 40% off a flip chart pack. You can do that by visiting makemathmoments.com/40 moments.
That is makemathmoments.com/40 moments. Oh, and if you are going to NCTM 2020, which is next week in Chicago, like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, both Whitebook's going to be there with their booth, giving away some free awesome swag, and we'll be sharing some free awesome swag at that booth as well. So make sure you pop by, say hello to Toby and Frank, and if you're around, make sure you say hi to John and I as we're cruising around the NCTM conference area.
Yeah, we can't wait to be there. Are you interested in joining us for an upcoming Math Mentoring Moment episode, just like this one, where you can also share a math class struggle? You can apply over at makemathmoments.com/mentor. That's makemathmoments.com/mentor.
Do not delay. Make sure that you smash that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform, especially Apple Podcasts, because that'll ensure that you're notified of new episodes as they come out each and every week.
Show notes and links to resources from this episode can be found at makemathmoments.com/episode 69. Again, that's makemathmoments.com/episode 69.
Well, until next time, Math Moment Makers, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And high fives for you.